Montana Territory. Autumn of 1878, the sky above Elk Ridge was the color of old bruises, and the wind carried the kind of bite that warned winter would come early. Henley Orwin stood at the edge of her family's broken homestead, a single match trembling in her fingers. The wood frame house was half-eaten by rot and silence. The barn leaned like an old drunk. Nothing was left of the life she had tried to build here, not after what happened. She struck the match. The flame flared to life, hissing in the wind. Her eyes burned, not from smoke, but memory. Two small wooden crosses stood behind the house. Their names faded, but not from her mind. David, Daisy, her children, taken by fever during the long winter last year. And her husband, gone before them, ran off with a woman from Helena, left Henley with two babies, a frozen creek, and a town too quiet to ask questions. "I should have left with him," she muttered. "Then you'd be dead too." The voice came from behind her. A man stepped out from the tree line, tall, shoulders broad beneath a worn trail coat. His boots crunched dry leaves. His face was half-shadowed by the brim of his hat, but his eyes were steady, blue as the winter sky. Henley didn't lower the match. "Who are you?" "Name's Callan Oaks," he said. "Saw the smoke, wanted to make sure no one was trapped." "No one left to trap," she said, her voice low, rough. "Just ghosts and regrets." Callan looked past her at the match still burning in her fingers. "You lighting it?" "I have to," she whispered. "I have to let it all go." She turned, touched the flame to the edge of the porch. The dry wood caught fast. Fire licked up the post like it remembered what it was supposed to be. She stepped back, eyes wide, breathing hard. Callan stepped beside her. Without a word, he struck another match against his boot heel and touched it to the barn. "Then let's watch it burn together," he said. Henley stared at him, stunned. The fire lit his face gold. He didn't look away. They stood in silence as the flames rose, crackling and hungry. The heat chased the chill from her bones. For the first time in over a year, her shoulders dropped from her ears. "Why would you do that?" she asked finally. "Why would you help me burn everything down?" Callan took off his hat, ran a hand through his dark hair. "Some things need burying," he said. "And some need burning." She looked at him, really looked. He was older than her by a few years, maybe 35. A scar curved beneath his left eye, faint but there. His clothes were clean but patched. His voice was calm, but there was something behind it, like he knew loss too. "You from around here?" she asked. "Not anymore," he said. "Used to live up near Lark's Hollow, left after my sister died. Been riding ever since." Henley nodded. She understood the kind of grief that made a man run. "Well," she said, watching as the roof of the old house caved in with a roar, "guess I'm free now." "Free and alone's a hard road," Callan said. "I've done harder." He glanced at her again. "Where will you go?" Henley wrapped her arms around herself. "I do not know yet. Maybe east, maybe south." "Anywhere but here." "I am heading south," he said. "Got a small place in Wyoming now, not much, but it is dry and the roof holds." "You're offering me a ride." "I am offering you a choice," he said. "You do not have to take it. But I will not leave you standing in ashes." Henley looked back at what used to be her home. The fire had taken it all, just smoke and heat and memories now. She looked at Callan. He did not look away. "All right," she said, "but I ride for me. I do not owe you anything. Never said you did." They left the land behind them by morning. Henley rode her old gelding and Callan led the way on his buckskin mare. They did not talk much. He let her set the pace. When they stopped at dusk, he built the fire and gave her the better blanket. 3 nights passed like that. On the 4th, she caught him watching her as she braided her hair by the firelight. "What?" she asked. "You do not talk in your sleep anymore," he said. She blinked. "You were listening," he shrugged. "You used to cry out for someone." "A boy and a girl." Henley's throat tightened. "David and Daisy." "I figured." She looked down at her hands. They were 6 and 4. I buried them myself." Callan was quiet for a long time, then he reached for a stick, poked at the fire. "I lost my nephew same year. His name was Denny. He was 7. Henley looked up. Their eyes met across the flames. "You still see him?" she asked quietly. "Every night." Henley nodded. She understood. The silence stretched between them, but it was not heavy this time. It was gentle, like shared breath. The next day they crossed into Wyoming. The land grew flatter, the sky wider. Callan led her through a narrow pass and down into a valley where a small cabin sat near a winding creek. It was nothing much, just wood, stone, and a porch, but smoke rose from the chimney, and the place looked lived in. "Yours?" Henley asked. "Built it myself," Callan said, dismounting. "After I stopped running." He helped her down from her horse without asking. His hands were calloused but steady. When their eyes met, something passed between them, quiet, steady, real. She looked at the cabin again. "You live alone, not by choice." Henley stood for a long moment, staring at the cabin, then at him. "I do not know how to start over," she said. Callan stepped closer. "Then do not do it alone," she swallowed. Her heart beat fast, but not from fear. She nodded. "Okay," she said. "But I need time. I have plenty." He led her inside. The fire was already burning in the hearth. The warmth wrapped around her like a quilt. She stood by the window, watching the last light fade over the hills. Callan moved around the small space, pouring water, setting out bread. He did not crowd her. He just moved like a man used to giving someone space. Henley turned toward him. "Thank you." He looked up. "For what?" "For striking that second match." Callan smiled, soft and real. "Some things are easier to burn down when someone else is there to watch them fall." Henley stepped closer. Not touching, just standing near. For the first time in a long time, the silence between them felt like peace. The first snowfall came 2 days after they rode into the valley. Thin flakes at first, then thicker, until the gray sky pressed low and the world softened beneath white. Henley stood on the porch early that morning, a wool shawl wrapped around her shoulders, watching the snow gather in the seams of the railing. The cold didn't bother her. What caught her in place was the quiet, the kind that came only when the land slept. Callan came out carrying 2 tin mugs. He handed her one without saying anything, steam curling from the rim. She sipped, surprised by the warmth and the taste, coffee cut with chicory and something faintly sweet. "I found a jar of sorghum in town last month," he said, leaning on the post beside her. "Traded for it." She nodded and took another sip. The snow muffled everything. No crows, no wind, just the sound of their breath and the faint crack of the fire inside. Callan glanced at her hands. "You always keep your rings." She looked down. Her fingers were bare. "No," she said, "buried them with the rest." He didn't ask who, he didn't have to. "You've got a way of standing still," he said after a moment. "Like you're waiting for something to catch up." Henley turned her head toward him. "Maybe I am." He nodded, didn't press. That was something she liked about him. He never pushed past what she offered. Inside, the cabin smelled of pine and smoke. She'd taken to sweeping the floor in the mornings, folding the blankets at night. Not because he asked, he never did, but because little things helped her remember the shape of living. That afternoon, she found him in the lean-to, mending a harness strap with a bone, needle, and sinew. His sleeves were rolled, forearms dark with old sun and new scars. "You always work like that?" she asked from the doorway. He looked up once, then back to the leather. "Idle hands don't stay idle long." She stepped inside, brushing snow from her skirt. "My father used to say that too." "What else did he teach you?" Henley hesitated. "To fish with twine, to shoot straight, not to trust a man who won't meet your eyes." Callan's gaze came up again. "Do I pass? You haven't looked away yet." The corner of his mouth lifted before he returned to his stitching. "You ever think about leaving the territory, I thought about it plenty, she said. But nowhere else ever felt like it could hold me. Then why burn it down? She leaned against the post. Because sometimes the only way forward's through fire. He nodded once, kept working, and she watched the way his hands moved, efficient, careful, practiced. There was steadiness in him she hadn't seen in a long time. That evening, she cooked cornmeal and beans while he brought in more wood. She didn't ask where he'd learned to chop logs like that, with clean, even splits. And he didn't ask where she'd learned to bake bread in a cast-iron Dutch oven without burning the bottom. They ate at the table, candle between them, shadows dancing on the walls. "You miss anyone?" she asked suddenly. He chewed, swallowed, then set his fork down. "Sometimes. I try not to let it last too long." "How do you do that?" He looked at her, eyes steady. "I give them a place. I let them sit with me a while, then I let them go again." She didn't speak. Her throat felt tight. Later, as he stirred the fire down for the night, she stood near the door, hands folded beneath her shawl. "I could help with the horses tomorrow," she said. "If you'll show me which one bites." He glanced over his shoulder. "They all do if you treat 'em wrong. And if you don't, then they'll follow you through a storm." She nodded slowly. "All right." He watched her a moment longer, then banked the coals and stood. "You want the bed tonight? I'll take the cot again." "You don't have to. I know." She turned away, but not before she saw the way he looked at her, not with expectation, but with a quiet patience that held no demand. When she lay down, the cot creaked beneath her. The cabin settled around them, timbers groaning like old men in the cold. She closed her eyes. From the hearth his voice came low. "I built this place thinking it'd stay empty." Henley kept her eyes shut. "And now, I'm glad it didn't." She didn't answer, but her breath came easier. Outside, the snow kept falling. But inside, the warmth held. By mid-December, the valley had settled into its hush. The snow deepened each day, rising against the cabin walls, softening the lines of the world until everything felt carved from silence and breath. Henley had taken to waking early, before the light. She'd wrap herself in her shawl and sit near the hearth while the coals still held a whisper of warmth. She never lit the lamp, just listened to the creak of the timbers and the wind nudging snow across the roof. Callan rose later, careful with his steps so the floorboards wouldn't wake her if she'd gone back to sleep. That morning, though, she was already up, her hands wrapped around a mug of hot water. He leaned against the doorframe, combing his fingers through his beard. "You always sit in the dark." She didn't turn. "Only when I need to remember I'm still here." He stepped forward, boots soft against the worn floor. "You're not just here, you're alive." Henley's jaw tightened. "I know." They didn't speak again until the light pushed through the frosted windows, turning everything a dull pewter. After breakfast, he handed her a pair of snowshoes fashioned from willow and rawhide. "They were my sister's," he said. "She never took to them, but they'll hold." Henley adjusted the leather straps, testing the balance. "Where are we going?" He nodded toward the ridge. "Creeks frozen through. I set traps above the bend. Might be mink, maybe squirrel." They hiked in silence, snowshoes whispering over packed drifts. The trail narrowed between two outcroppings and Callan paused, holding out an arm. "Elk passed through here last night. You can see where the snow's pressed down." Henley studied the prints, then squinted toward the tree line. "They move quiet for their size." "She taught me to track," he said. "My sister. We'd follow a trail for miles just to say we could." Henley glanced at him. "Did she stay long in one place?" "Longer than me," he said. "She married a man from the Bitterroot, had a son." Henley waited. "They both died," he said. "Winter cut in early. He tried to cross the river with his boy on his back. Ice gave out." He didn't say more, and she didn't fill the silence. When they reached the traps, two were empty. One held a mink already stiff from the cold. Callan knelt and worked with steady hands, wrapping the animal in burlap. "You still wear grief like it's sewn into your coat," she said. He didn't look up. "Maybe it is." Henley crouched beside him. "So is mine." Later, they stopped beneath a cluster of pines to rest. He handed her a strip of dried venison from his coat pocket. She took it without thanks, chewing slowly. "You think it's always going to feel like this?" she asked. "How's that?" "Like something's always missing, even when the day's good." Callan looked out toward the hills. "I think the missing stays, but the weight of it changes." Henley nodded once. "I want to believe that." They headed back as the sun dropped low, casting long blue shadows over the snow. Near the cabin, Callan paused and pointed to a line of tracks veering toward the barn. "Fox," he said. "Looking for hens we don't have." Henley smiled faintly. "Smart fox. Persistent, anyway." That evening, she stitched a tear in one of his work shirts while he sanded the haft of a broken axe handle. The fire cracked low between them, casting soft light over their hands. He watched her fingers move. "You used to sew for your children." "I did." He was quiet a moment. "You miss the sound?" he asked. She looked up. "What sound?" "Their voices." She let out a breath. "I miss everything, but mostly the way they filled a room without trying." Callan set the handle down gently. "I remember Denny's laugh. He'd laugh so hard he'd fall over backward." Henley's eyes softened. "David did that. Daisy would scold him like she was the mother." They smiled, not at the pain but at the shape of it, how it lingered in the details, not the endings. By the time she set the shirt aside, the fire was low and the night deep. She stood, smoothing her skirt. "I'm not afraid to start again," she said. "But I don't know what that looks like." Callan stood too, slower. "It could look like a table set for two," he said. "A roof we keep fixing. One day folding into the next." Henley's breath caught. "What if I don't know how to hold something without breaking it?" He took a step forward, close enough she could feel the heat of him. "Then we hold it together," he said. She didn't answer, not with words. But she didn't pull away when he reached for her hand. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, two people stood with their scars uncovered, and neither looked away. The sun rose late and pale on Christmas morning, casting long bars of light across the cabin floor. Henley stood at the window, her breath fogging the glass, watching a single hawk circle above the ridge. The valley was quiet, but it was not empty. Not anymore. Behind her, Callan stirred a pot over the stove, the scent of dried apple and cinnamon bark warming the air. He didn't speak, but she could feel the steady rhythm of his work. It grounded her like the weight of her own boots on the worn boards. "You ever do anything for Christmas?" she asked, her voice soft as wool. Callan didn't look up. "Used to. When I was young, my mother'd make a cake with cornmeal and blackberry jam. We'd sit around a fire and tell stories. After she passed, we stopped." Henley crossed the room, fingers brushing the table edge. "My boy used to leave out pine cones he painted with snowberry juice. Said they were presents for the birds." He stirred the pot once more, then set the ladle aside. "I've got something for you." She raised her brows. "You do?" He crossed to the cabinet beside the hearth and pulled out a bundle wrapped in burlap and tied with twine. He set it on the table without ceremony. Henley hesitated before untying it. Inside was a pair of gloves, not new but well made, the leather soft and dark, lined with rabbit fur at the cuffs. She ran her fingers over the seams, then looked up. "Did you make these?" He nodded once. "Had a hide left from last season. Thought you might need something warmer." She blinked, jaw tightening in a way she couldn't quite stop. "No one's made me anything in years." Callan didn't step closer. He didn't have to. "Well, they're yours now." She looked down at the gloves, then slipped them on. They fit snugly, like they'd been measured to her hands. "I didn't get you anything," she said quietly. "You stayed," he said. "That's more than enough." Later that day, they walked to the far edge of the property where the land sloped down to a shallow ravine. Henley carried a small spade. Callan carried a pouch. She dug carefully, breaking through the frost with firm, methodical strokes. When the hole was wide enough, he knelt beside her and opened the pouch. Inside were 3 smooth stones, each one marked with a shallow carving, a circle, a line, and a small cross. Henley didn't ask what they meant. She could see it in the way his fingers lingered on each one. They buried the stones side by side, then covered them with earth again. No words were spoken. None were needed. As they stood, brushing soil from their hands, she turned to him. "Why here?" He looked out across the valley. "They never had a place before. Now they do." Back at the cabin, she opened the shutters just enough to let the last light in. Callan sat near the fire, sharpening a blade with long, slow strokes. She watched the muscles in his arms move beneath his shirt, the deliberate way he focused on the steel. "You always work like that?" she asked, tilting her head. He glanced up. "Like what?" "Like it's the only thing keeping you upright." He set the whetstone down and leaned back, stretching his legs. "Maybe it is. Work steadies the hands. The rest follows." Henley folded a blanket and set it on the bench. "You have any plans come spring?" "I've thought about building a second shed, maybe clear more land for barley, but I wasn't sure if I'd still be here." She crossed the room, stopping just short of him. "I'm not going anywhere." Callan studied her face. "You sure?" "I'm tired of running," she said, "and this place, it doesn't ask anything of me I can't give." He stood slowly, eyes never leaving hers. "I want more than silence between us." "I know," she said. "So do I." He reached out, not quickly but with intention. His hand settled at the small of her back, warm and sure. She stepped into him like she'd been waiting for it, not just today, but through every long hour before. The kiss was slow, not hesitant but anchored. Like a door easing open after seasons of being shut. When they parted, neither spoke. They didn't need to. That night they lay beneath the quilt she had sewn from scraps found in the loft, old shirts, a saddle blanket, a strip of muslin with faded ink. She curled into his side, her hand resting flat against his chest. As sleep tugged at her, she whispered, "You ever think about what comes after peace?" His voice rumbled low beside her. "Maybe peace is what comes after everything else." She closed her eyes, her breath evening. "Then I'll stay and find out." Snow fell again, soft against the roof, but inside the fire held. And so did they. The thaw came slow that year, dragging its heels through March like a mule in deep mud. The ridge above the valley shed snow by midday, but the shadows still held ice. Down by the creek, the water ran faster each day, chewing through the crust that winter had left behind. Henley stood at the fence line, sleeves rolled, a hammer balanced in one hand and a length of split pine in the other. The wind tugged at her braid, but she didn't mind. Her hands were stronger now, calloused, sure, and the ache in her shoulders no longer felt like punishment. It felt like proof. "You've got the rail too low," Callan said from behind her. "A calf'll press straight through it come spring." She looked over her shoulder, one brow raised. "Then you should have built this fence better the first time." He leaned against the post beside her, one boot resting on the lower rail. "Wasn't expecting company when I did." "Well, you have it now." She set the pine in place and drove the first nail. It rang out sharp in the still morning air. Callan watched her work without stepping in. He'd learned that much: she didn't need help unless she asked. And she didn't ask often. After the last nail was set, she wiped her palms against her skirt and turned to him. "You still thinking about that shed?" He nodded. "Figure if we're keeping chickens, they'll need something sturdier than that lean-to." Henley crossed her arms. "And if we have chickens, we'll need a root cellar. I'm not salting everything through next winter." Callan looked at her, expression unreadable. "You saying you'll be here through next winter?" She didn't look away. "I'm saying you're not getting rid of me over a few hens." He laughed low, genuine, and the sound warmed her more than the sun ever could. "That's so, that's so." They walked back toward the cabin, boots sinking into softening earth. Along the way, she stopped beneath the cottonwood near the porch. The tree had held through the winter, its limbs bare but still solid. "I've been thinking," she said, resting her palm against the bark. "About this place, us, what we're building." Callan tilted his head, waiting. "I don't want to keep calling it yours," she said. "If I'm staying, and I am, we ought to make it ours." He stepped closer, his voice quieter. "You sure?" Henley looked up at him, eyes clear. "I am." That night she folded her dresses into the tall chest beside the bed, not just the spare one she wore for Sunday, but all of them. Callan added a second hook to the wall for her shawl. Little things, but they mattered. In the weeks that followed, the valley turned green. Callan plowed a narrow strip behind the cabin, and Henley planted beans, squash, and late potatoes with sharp precision. They mended the roof together after the last spring gale, and she patched the places he'd missed the first time. One night, as they sat on the porch with a tin of coffee between them, he reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. "I never thought I'd have this again," he said. "This," she asked, "a place, a person, a reason to keep waking up steady." Henley's fingers tightened around his. "Neither did I." He looked at her then, long and quiet, the way he always did when the words mattered. "I want to marry you." She didn't answer at first. The wind passed through the grass, carrying the scent of lilac from the bush she'd planted near the barn. "Why?" Callan didn't flinch. "Because I love you, because I trust you, and because what we have deserves a name." Henley stood, pulling him with her. "Then you'd better build that shed first. I won't marry a man who promises more than he finishes." He grinned. "Deal." They wed in early June, beneath the cottonwood whose leaves had just fully unfurled. No preacher, just their neighbor from over the ridge, a woman with hands like split oak and a voice like gravel. She read the words slow, sure. Callan placed a ring carved from antler on Henley's hand. She pressed her lips to his in front of the tree, and the valley seemed to hush for it. That night they lay beneath open windows, the air warm and sweet with the smell of new grass. "You ever think about having more?" she asked, tracing a line down his chest. "Children," she nodded. He was quiet, thoughtful. "I do," he said, "but only if it's what you want." "I do," she said, "not to replace, just to begin again." He kissed her then, slow and certain, and she moved into him with a heart unguarded. The seasons passed like pages. They built the shed. The hens came. The root cellar held. And when autumn returned, Henley felt a new weight in her belly, one that didn't come from grief or hunger. Callan built a cradle by hand, carved a bear into one end and a hawk into the other. Henley sewed a blanket of wool and cotton scraps. The cabin filled with quiet laughter, shared work, and the kind of peace neither of them had dared to want before. When the child came, strong, lunged, and red-cheeked, they named her Ruth. She had her mother's eyes and her father's hands. And when she slept, curled in the crook of her mother's arm, the whole world felt still and right. Years passed, marked by the growth of trees and the slow shaping of land under steady feet. They didn't speak often of what had come before. But sometimes, on quiet nights, they'd sit by the fire and hold hands like it was the first time, the weight of old sorrow softened by the life they'd built. Henley never lit another match to anything she loved, and Callan never rode on alone again. They remained in the valley that held them through snow and bloom and every season after, together, always.